You hit record. Okay. And let me say hello to, whoops, I just lost Dale for a second.
We did lose Dale.
Jennifer?
She left.
Jennifer's here.
Jennifer's there. Dale has left.
Okay. Well, tonight's at Nourish. I'm sure Dale will be right back. Tonight's at Nourish.
You can't trust Dale. We know this.
Here she is.
She's tricky.
There's Dale. It is a program with two old friends, very old friends who've done at Nourish and are just sort of our mainstays of our community. Jennifer Moses is our author for tonight, and Dale Russakoff is our facilitator, and will be interviewing Jennifer in her own way. Facilitating, thank you. You know, when I talk about inner voices in the world of psychology, they're often strange voices. I think Jennifer's are probably more creative. So we're going to talk about inner voices in literature, in Jennifer's literature. Dale, you take it away, and if you want me to monitor the chat, but there are so few of us, we'll probably just be able to ask the questions. So it's all to you, Dale. You're muted, Dale.
I said, maybe we'll have a lot of people joining and then you'll have to moderate the chat. Anyway, we're just among friends, I don't know if this introduction is necessary, but I will tell you about our guest, Jennifer Moses. Jennifer is a multi-genre author, and I've been very impressed by that very fact of her, that she writes fiction, she writes nonfiction, she writes journalism, she writes literature, memoir, she writes about old people, young people. She kind of defies categorization. And I know that this has even been a challenge for her career-wise, because I remember years ago, you were talking to an editor who said, well, but you don't just write about one thing. I can't pitch you to a publisher because you write about, you write novels, you write journalism, what do I say you are? But Jennifer didn't sort of conform. She has all these different voices and things to say and ways to say them. And she's, by the way, a painter and a gardener and a lover of dogs. She walks all over Montclair. And she is who she is. And the publishing industry has to deal with her. So I really admire that. And I think you have so many things to say, so many different ways that you like to say them, that it wouldn't make sense for you to pigeonhole yourself. So the hell with them. Anyway, here's a list of the books Jennifer has written. Visiting Hours, Bagels and Grits, The Book of Joshua, Food and Wine, that's WHINE, The Art of Dumpster Diving, and Tales from My Closet. Her most recent book is this collection of short stories, The Man Who Loved His Wife. And when she's not writing, she's painting or walking her beloved mutts. And she and her husband, Stuart, are the parents of 3 children. They live in Montclair, and they are really active members of Shomrei. So we're here. I love what Jennifer said, that she said it's not insanity, it's fiction, because she has all these voices in her head, and she's turned them into characters and stories and explorations through fiction, and sometimes through journalism. But anyway, I wanted to start because I actually very recently read The Man Who Loved His Wife, this group of short stories, and they are so good and so varied and so Jewish. And I wanted you to talk about, I wondered, is there a favorite story in this book that you would like to start off talking about?
Yes. First, I just want to say, Dale, thank you for, agreeing to do this for me, which you're doing for me as a friend. It's I can't tell you how much I appreciate your being in my life and doing this, because when you know, just for starters, it's hard to talk about a book of fiction. Any book of fiction, it's like, you know, you want to just tell people, just read it, y'all. If you want to know what it's about. It's, you know, I want to just say, like, it's good, read it, and that's not a very interesting thing to say. But yeah, the first story in the collection, which is called The Uncircumcised, I think is the strongest story in the collection. And I put it first because I think it's the strongest story in the collection. And it kind of, it's set in Baton Rouge, where, as you all probably know by now, Stuart and I, with our kids, moved here from Baton Rouge. We'd lived in Baton Rouge for 13 years when we moved here, just before Obama became our president. And so whatever year that was. And Baton Rouge was absolutely filled with colorful, kooky nut jobs, most of them in our synagogue, but outside the synagogue as well. And to be Jewish and Southern and live in a small town, like live in a city like Baton Rouge, a small city, I should say, put certain pressures on the culture that you wouldn't have in a more Jewish place like this. And it created, you know, this sort of wonderful, annoying tapestry that spoke with the Southern accent, which was different than the annoying Jews I'd known until we moved to Baton Rouge. But anyway, long story short, I'm walking my dog Marion, who's long since gone to doggy heaven, around City Park one day, and it just came to me that, you know, what if Marion started speaking Hebrew to me? I had just begun studying modern Hebrew myself. And then I thought, no, what if she started speaking Yiddish? And then what came to me was an elderly survivor who was a member of our shul. They said about him, he takes a licking and he just keeps on kicking, and he did. This man just was unbelievable inner strength. He finally died in great old age, after he moved north to live with his daughter. But and it was just sort of all with me. And I got home, I couldn't wait to get to my computer, and I sat down and I wrote a paragraph, and it stopped. That was just it. And I'm going to say 5 years ago, I sat down at my computer and I was just sort of messing around, and the rest of the story came to me in one whoosh. And by dinner, I had written it, and it was letter perfect. And when that happens, it's just, you know, it's downloading. It's actually our son Jonathan, who happens to be home tonight and then off other places. He and Rose will be 28 in about 3 minutes. But Jonathan was home over the winter holidays because he's back in school. He's in grad school. And I asked him to proofread the final manuscript because because he's a really good proofreader, and he did read it. And after he finished the first story, he just said to me, "Mom, how did you do that?" You know, and I pointed up, and he got that because he's actually Orthodox. Jonathan is on a very deep spiritual path of his own. But that's really what it felt like. It had just sort of, the story had been given to me.
Wow.
The funny bit about the story, which is called The Uncircumcised, is originally I'd called the entire collection The Uncircumcised. And the publisher said, no, we can't do that. It's going to get all these porn hits. Like, it's going to be on porn sites. I'm like, and what's wrong with that? You know, drive sales, as she insisted. So that was a net loss, but there you go.
So what do you think unlocked the story at the moment that you sat down and wrote it? I mean, did something happen?
I don't remember that anything happened. I just think I don't remember what we called a trigger, or like, I don't remember any event or anything I'd read this sort of all of a sudden was like, aha, it just, I don't honestly don't remember. And then the thing was rejected by about 20 literary magazines, which happens, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? Right? But it's just.
What was this story published?
It was finally published in The Sun, which was a great place. The Sun is a great place to publish. It's a very funny, The Sun is based in North Carolina and has a readership of about 70,000, which is huge for serious sort of literary, it's kind of the poor man's New Yorker is what The Sun is. It's an interesting very interesting, intelligent publication. So I was thrilled when it finally came out in The Sun. But yeah, all of the stories but one had been previously published by the time they came out.
Right. Okay.
In the collection.
Right. Oh, because it's so funny. When I was reading the story, I envisioned you working it out as you were writing, and all of a sudden the dog was speaking Yiddish. But I didn't have any idea that you thought that before you even wrote it.
That was the nugget. That was just the nugget. A Yiddish speaking dog and a Holocaust survivor. That was the nugget of it. Of course, right. my protagonist isn't a Holocaust survivor. He's he isn't. He's a refugee. He right. himself was never. He's in Europe, but he gets out.
Right.
So he's not technically a survivor.
Right.
And personally witnessed and survived the horrors.
Yeah. Well, it is that story is amazing. And there's a blurb on the back from an author who says, Jennifer Ann Moses is our century's Bernard Malamud or Saul Bellow. With warmth, tenderness, and wit, she captures the essence of the modern Jewish experience in the family, the workplace, and the bedroom. It leaves you hungry for more.
Yeah, that's nice, huh?
Yeah.
So, anyway, but I have to say, Saul Bellow and Bernard Malamud, were like, famous and best-selling.
Thank God she didn't say Philip Roth.
I mean, if I'm really all that, let's get some sales on, y'all.
I agree.
I can't make it. All I can do is write the stories. Right, all you can do as the writer or any artist or really in any endeavor is do the best you can. You just do what you can as best as you can and hope it makes a difference and hope it finds its way into the world in an important in whatever important in an important way, whatever important means. I'm desperate.
So are you serious? You wrote this story, you just sat down and it came right out of you. You didn't rewrite it, you didn't Correct. Edit it, you didn't have to refine it. It just
I edited a little bit around the edges, I took a phrase out here, tightened a sentence there, but no, basically came out perfect.
Is that the way you generally write? Like when it's ready, it just pours out of you, or what? How do you?
Depends on what I'm doing. Shorter pieces generally. So the short stories generally come out in whole cloth.
Wow.
They're just done. Because I either get it because it's like an imp. With a short story, it's sort of like a sprint. So if you get off for a good, if you get off on a good start with that momentum, you're on your way.
Right. So did you use the same beginning that you started with before?
Yeah, I did actually for that story.
You saved it all those years?
Yeah, I save it in my computers and sometimes in my computer, and sometimes I even find it again.
Yeah.
But so that one just was in me. And
for those who haven't read it, can you give a summary of this? Will you give a summary of it? Because it's
that one story?
Yeah.
Yeah, the one starting story is the story of an elderly man whose name is Felder.
Felder.
Actually, my first name when I first called him Russakoff.
You didn't.
I did. I changed it. Why did I change it? Probably because by then I'd met you. And
you mean you called him Russakoff before you had met me?
I think so.
Wow.
I don't remember. I might have just named him after you because I like the name.
I see.
And then I changed it to Felder. I don't remember my thinking. I changed it to Felder, but yeah, he's an elderly man. He's lost his wife, his elderly wife. He has two daughters who he's raised in, of all places, Baton Rouge, because when he finally gets across the ocean as a young man, all in one piece, he ends up in Louisiana, of all these crazy places. But that happens, and he ends up marrying a woman he kind of hates, and she kind of hates him. But they have to, but they have this fiercely sexual uh, marriage, and they stay together. And he loses her, and he gets very old, and his daughters worry. His middle-aged daughters, who've grown up in the comfort of America, worry about him, and they get him a dog, who he very quickly comes to, a golden retriever rescue dog, and he almost immediately comes to believe that the dog is a reincarnation of his dead sister, who was killed in the camps. And they begin talking to each other in Yiddish, and Felder and Esther, he calls the dog Esther, the name of his dead sister, strike up a wonderful relationship. And his daughters become more and more concerned about him. And the story, I don't want to give it away, that's like the setup of the story. And it's set in Baton Rouge, where people like just don't get it. They don't get it, which they didn't in Baton Rouge. They didn't get it. It's not that they were anti-Semitic. They just didn't get it. Why would they? I mean, we moved down there. People were like, "Well, do you know Seinfeld?" I'm like, no. I'm exaggerating. I made that up, but they don't get it. It's a tiny minority, the Jewish minority in Baton Rouge. So that sort of is in the mix of the background of the story as well.
Right. And he survived the Holocaust because when his whole family was taken away, he hid in the closet with the housekeeper, right? Wasn't right, she the housekeeper?
The housekeeper kind of pushes him into the back of the closet with the dirty laundry.
Yeah.
And then he goes home with her to the to the very poor side of town, and she keeps him. And then when the bombs begin to fall, he escapes and gets out alive because he's young and strong. Yeah.
And now he's old and lonely.
Now he's old and lonely, right? Yeah.
Anyway, I recommend it to everyone. And I also was wondering, like, how do you capture a Yiddish voice? Where did you get that?
I really got it from just reading everything I've ever been able to get my hands on in translation from Yiddish.
So you didn't hear it growing up?
Oh, we were Yekis. I mean, I didn't know what a Yeki was because we were Yeki. Yeki is a German Jew, for those who don't know. I'd never heard the word Yeki because we were Yekis. Not only were we Yekis, we were like the only Jews within. I grew up in McLean, Virginia, which is now very, very suburban and very wealthy. It was quite rural then. It was still a lot of farms. And there were, at the time I was growing, my siblings and I were growing up there were the beginnings of sort of the suburban the housing developments were being built, but they were, they weren't fancy. They were 4-bedroom split levels, nothing fancy at all. A lot of my friends in high school lived in those houses, and this was not fancy stuff. But my father, who'd grown up really very traditional in like an all Jewish world in Baltimore, had an idea that he wanted to, have a Jewish life deep in the, waspy countryside. He was crazy, actually, but and so we moved out there in 1960. I was a year old when we moved from my parents' tiny little rental house in the district to McLean, Virginia. And then, where am I going with this? And I didn't really know Jews at all outside my own family circle. My cousins, both my parents came from large families, so I had a lot of cousins all over the place, but they were also all Yakis. what did they know? So,
so how did you end up reading so much Yiddish translation? I mean, where did you get the bug for this?
I just, the bug started, I've had the Jewish, it's such a long backstory. I don't want to bore everyone to death with my, Jewish psychodrama. My father, was very, very remote and kind of mean and very insistently Jewish, but it was at such a distance that I couldn't partake of it. And even if I could, I already felt like I was a failure to begin with, because I had been raised as a boy in Baltimore in the 1930s, so I was already a failure. And it was this sort of crazy, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I just had this desperate urge to find a kind of bridge to my father. That's really where it started, with the emotional need to have some connection with my distant father. And then I just began to study my ass off. I went to Tufts. There were it was probably 15 or maybe more percent Jewish kids there. And they were like Jewish Jews. They knew what a bagel was. They'd heard of the Talmud, right? And, and they didn't necessarily worry about, their tennis game and stuff like this. And I just stumbled into a class called Yid Lit, which was very popular on campus. It was, there must have been 200 kids per semester. It was a lecture class. And that was where I first started reading this stuff. And then it I just kept reading, really. I mean, I just kept reading and reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. I mean, actually, it was a funny thing. I think I'm one of maybe two people who checked out of our Shomrei library the Yeshiva by Chaim Grad. It's about 1 million pages long. It's been translated in English, obviously, or I never would have read it. But I can't get enough of it. I just love it. It speaks to my kishkas. It just does.
Right.
So that's to the degree that I've been able to kind of channel those more Yiddish voices. It's really as much from my reading as
reading. It's interesting because I think of Yiddish as such a spoken language, and I mean, like you, I was raised in the Deep South, but my parents spoke Yiddish to each other. They were both first-generation Americans,
right?
And their Eastern European parents just spoke Yiddish at home a lot, right. And they used it to talk behind our backs in front of our faces, like they just talked Yiddish. And so I just assumed that you had heard it also.
Once Woody Allen became a thing, I would hear it in Woody Allen movies. I mean, I used to go to the Woody Allen movies with my mother and my sisters, and sometimes with a couple girlfriends or whatever. Tyson's Corner, Virginia, had just been built, and we'd go there to the movies. And we'd be the only ones in the audience laughing because we were the only ones who got the Jewish humor. But no, I had Christmas growing up at my mother's in Scarsdale. We had Christmas. My father put the kibitz on that when I was 6, so we stopped doing that.
But it's interesting because I think people don't realize that the best fiction often comes from really deep research into into history and facts. I mean, so many people who write fiction do a lot of reading and combing of history to understand what they're trying to say.
Well, you kind of have to get it right emotionally, or it all falls apart. Like if you don't nail the psychology, nothing else you do matters really. You just, I don't know what you're doing, but it doesn't stick. It's not authentic.
Jennifer, I wonder too, I know you did a lot of journalism before you came, when you were in Washington, before you went to Baton Rouge, you were freelancing as a journalist. Did you come to fiction later? I mean, what led you to start? I mean, where did the fiction?
No, the fiction was first.
The fiction was first? What did you, but your first book was nonfiction.
So I always wanted to write stories but it was partly I'm in high school, I'm 15, I feel like a schmuck, all the other girls are blonde and I was sort of considered the family idiot in my family. I was like the village idiot, and like I had this big. Now I'm telling you, Jewish psychodrama, to the big beyond. But and I had this giant fantasy. One day I'm gonna be like Saul Bellow, and I'll show them. Right? Didn't quite work out that way, but I always wanted. I don't know, the impulse to write fiction was always there first, but I could get jobs writing for the Washington Post. I could get those jobs. You can't get a job writing fiction.
You have to write a whole novel first, right?
And I just, I had this opportunity, and it was all freelance. I know I was never hired on staff. I got this opportunity to start writing for the Washington Post, and my stuff took off there because I was doing something very different nobody had ever done, because I'm not a trained journalist. I'm not really a journalist at all. I can do journalism a little bit around the edges, where I will check my facts and make sure I don't actually make my facts up. But like that's about as far as I go with journalism. I don't do deep digging and putting the picture together and all this stuff. I just make sure I'm not making it up. So that's what I was doing at the Post, and I had a really good run there, and it was really fun. Then we moved to Baton Rouge. And so things changed again. So like Stuart just kept moving me around the world, and I just took, okay, well, now what can I do?
Right. And so do you think that there's a connection between fiction writing and painting? Because both spring from inner voices, inner visions. Do you feel like when you're writing fiction, you're using something, some of the same artistic voices, just in a different way from painting?
Yeah, it really feels like a different part of my soul, the brain that's being activated. My fiction writing, in fact, all my nonfiction as well as my fiction, is more cerebral. It has to be, because words are metaphor, right? An image that's right in front of you is just what it is. The red color is red, even though the word red is metaphor, right? And those letters RED are symbols, but it's an immediate physical, that's not the word, sensual experience. Your retina takes it in, and that's whatever resonates with you in an image is just there. Writing is a more cerebral activity, at least it is for me. So I'm also, I train, so, quote unquote, as a writer by just, writing and writing, reading and reading, and so forth and so on. Just writing, goodness gracious, encyclopedias of garbage that I threw out over the years until I finally learned how to write, right? It just took me a really long time.
Did you ever study writing or go to writing workshops?
I did. Right after college, I did exactly that. But I'll get there in a second. But just the painting for me is a much more direct. I almost feel like my brain isn't doing it at all. My hand is just doing it. Like my hand knows what to do, and I'm not really thinking through it at all. So it's very innocent. It goes back to not a pre-verbal time for me, but a pre-literate, literary, developed intellect time for me. It's just playing.
That sounds a little bit like this, the short story, The Uncircumcised, that it wasn't like you were thinking, it wasn't cerebral, it just came, right? So it sounds like there's something similar there.
Yeah, no, my best work in both areas is very organic from someplace, so deep inside me. It does feel like it's been put there by God, and I'm just channeling it. But that said, the written work is still just a level of complexity for me above the painted work. Of course, my painted work is so simple. It's so it's so childlike. It's so untrained, because I am an untrained painter.
When did you start painting?
Well, again, it's I was a kid who lived in the art room in school. I went to this very, very, very waspy private school where we wore uniforms and had a Christmas play and sang, Maypole and I don't know, all this crazy Anglo-Saxon stuff and Latin and so forth and so on. And I was basically terrified of my entire 8 years there. And I found refuge in the art room where there was this wonderful, gentle art teacher, Mr. Hebel, who just let me hang out there and paint as much as, when I wasn't in regular class. So I did that and I did that. And when I went to high school, then I transferred to the local public high school. And then all of a sudden there were these really serious artists, really good teenage artists. And A, they intimidated, but B, I just kind of lost interest in it. So I just stopped. There was no pressure. I just lost interest. By then I'm more interested in, like, I have to go to college. Maybe I'm not so stupid after all. Maybe I will learn this stuff that I have to learn in high school. And then I picked up a paintbrush again in my 40s. Again, just this urge. I wasn't thinking about it. It came to me after years of working among full gospel African American AIDS patients. I worked as a volunteer at a place called St. Anthony's Home in Baton Rouge. I visited once a week and heard all these stories and listened to all this gospel music and heard all these stories. And and then I picked up a paintbrush and I didn't stop. That was it. I picked up a paintbrush and that was it. Like the dam had been unleashed, and then I went and bought paint.
And that the style, the primitive kind of childlike style that you paint in, was that the way you were painting before? Or was this a whole new? It was brand new. Wow.
As a kid, I was a serious kid paint artist, and I learned perspective, and I learned cross hatching, and I learned how to mix colors, and I learned how to do watercolor and oils and all the stuff you learn as a baby artist. And I did it all, with reasonable competence for my age. And by the time I'm in high school, I'm doing sort of reasonably non-appalling, pretty kind of fake impressionism, like a lot of flowers and a lot of landscape, and they were pretty. You could frame them and put them in your bathroom. Because I loved impressionism. It's beautiful. It's pretty. It dazzles the eye. And that's what I was, doing as a kid, and then it came out very different. Decades.
So you started to tell us how you actually did study writing. So how did that? What made you decide to do that, and how did you do it? And have you ever taken a short story or a novel to a workshop and worked with other writers or with a writing teacher?
God forbid.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is a story I don't like to tell because I'm a little embarrassed, but we're among friends, so I can tell it. So when I went to Tufts, and when it was time to think about what was going to happen after college, I was just not ready to think about what was going to happen after college. The idea of going out and getting some dreadful, boring job, because in my field, they were all going to be dreadful and boring. Didn't matter what it was. I just no, don't make me do that. And meanwhile, I really did want to write. And so I applied to and got into the BU Creative Writing Graduate Workshop in Boston. I wanted to say Boston. I got in. And so I did, and I was drawn to that particular program because it was only a year. There were some really famous ones. Iowa's the most famous. I think that's 3 years. There are a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. They're very famous that every year graduates some beautiful young person who, writes a best-selling literary masterpiece. And then, I want to put myself out of my misery. But BU was a year. So I went to BU. And it was 2 fiction writing workshops a week with 2 different writer/teachers. And then we had to do, because in those days, the program was a master's. Actually, I got a master's in English. So it was a kind of combo of a standard graduate program in English and creative writing. So I had to take regular academic classes as well.
Do you think that had a big impact on you as a writer and shaped how you write? Or
No, what it did though, it made me a much better reader. You can't teach writing is the thing. In my opinion, I have friends who teach creative writing in these graduate programs, and they completely think I'm bats and nuts and just wrong. But you cannot teach somebody how to be an artist. You just can't do it. You can teach them techniques. You can teach them the pitfalls. You can work on, especially the performing arts, is dancing and singing and all that. But you cannot teach somebody how to be an artist. The best you can do is give them, the craft.
Mm-hmm.
Craft. So I began to have, I didn't really have any craft, but I began to have the eyes to see what craft was. I became a much better reader after that year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kept at it.
And where do you get your inspiration? I mean, does it just come from everywhere? I mean,
where do you get your inspiration?
I don't know. It's harder and harder, to tell you the truth.
Right. Yeah, so I don't know. It depends. I mean, I've gone through whole years where I've had no inspiration and kind of feel like my soul's died inside of me. Like, sometimes I Google myself, am I still alive? I mean, it's really kind of pathetic, but
I was going to say
from different sources. Sometimes I read something and it just like, duh.
Right. But this book, it was all Jewish inspiration, right? I mean,
yeah. I've written them over 20 years. There's not like I sat down and wrote 13 stories and got them published.
Right.
These are stories. I mean, I've got another 20 out there in literary magazines that I haven't pulled together as a collection. I hope.
Are those Jewish also?
Yeah, and then I published 100 short stories here, there, and the other place.
Right.
Not that many, close to. And of those, maybe 40 are Jewish. Yeah.
Because I thought when you said that you thought that the Uncircumcised was the strongest story in the collection, I actually thought that the second story, The Holy Messiah, was extremely strong. And that is a story that's really about the history of Israel.
Right.
And it's so, it's just got such a rich, just grasp of those, all of those themes. And they're just like, you wield them with such ease and authority that it doesn't sound at all like a history lesson. It's just.
Well, it's not, because it's the story of his father and his son.
Right.
But, I actually, there's a little bit in that story where the narrator is saying, can you believe that there are those of us, even here in Israel, who don't believe in the state of Israel, and they call it the land of Israel, right? And it was our rabbi who mentioned that to me, like the week earlier. Like he was just so pissed off about something going on in the Haredi community, and he was like tearing his hair out. And he said, "Can you believe these schmucks?" That's not what he said, but that was sort of the idea, and that got the wheels going. And then I wrote, and I can't remember if I wrote that when our own son was in the IDF, or
I wondered about that.
I think I wrote it after he was safe and sound.
Yeah, I was wondering if you drew on that experience, because it's about a family whose son is a soldier.
Right. So of course I drew on some of the feelings. I did write that story after Sam got out of the Army, because while he was there, just way too close to home.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess we're getting close to. We have 15 minutes left, and so I want to let people ask questions. Anybody who wants to ask Jennifer a question. Carolyn?
Unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carol. Excuse me.
Well, it isn't so much a question, but when you were talking about Yiddish, about how your parents would talk in front of you in Yiddish so you wouldn't understand what they were talking about. I remember the story that my mother told that when she was dating my father and she went for dinner and she was meeting them, and my father's parents would talk in Yiddish. What they didn't know was my mother knew what they were talking about. She did not know Yiddish, but her grandmother always spoke German in the house, and the correlation between Yiddish and German. So she knew what they were talking about. And she sort of told my father, and he sort of let them know, but that's what I find amusing. You sometimes have to be careful who you're talking to.
That's great. Yeah. You know, there was a great story years ago about, I'm trying to remember what, there was some dogs who had been trained by the IDF. They were Israeli dogs who had come, you know, I think they were some local police department in like somewhere like Montana had bought these dogs from Israel, and they were trying to tell them to sit and stay and everything, and they didn't obey. And they had some rabbi come and speak to them in Hebrew, and they did everything he said. They knew Hebrew, but they didn't know English. And anyway, when Shirley wrote a comment here about my mother was a survivor and she spoke to our dog in Yiddish and was convinced the dog understood her.
Of course the dog did.
Yeah. Anyway, and then Carol wrote, I'm sure the dog did understand. So anyway, sorry for the digression. Other questions for Jennifer? Carney.
Well, I was going to reinforce a point you made and see if you might follow up on it. When you said that you have to get the emotional truth of the story before you can start researching, I went to a wonderful long Zoom talk with the writer Amor Towles about his fabulous novel, A Gentleman from Moscow, which is full of vast detail of Russian history and the neighborhood of the Kremlin, everything else. And he was asked very directly if he had done tremendous research before he sat down and wrote. He said, absolutely not. I don't work that way. I figure out, I had a germ of a story. I figured it out. I worked on it until I was ready. I didn't know a thing about Russian history until after that. Do you feel that strongly about it?
Well, I never research. Never. It's just like in me or it isn't. But I don't write historical anything. I don't. If I'm going to a location in any of my work that I'm not real familiar with, I can Google it around the edges just to get the street names right and stuff like that. But I don't write historical fiction. I don't really read historical fiction much, now and again. But I know, I mean, research is not where I get, that's not what my work is made of. It's not made of that. It's if it's not like really, for me, if it doesn't come out really organically and whole, it's no good to begin with. So it doesn't matter how many of the details I get right if if the center doesn't hold. That's just how I've always worked. But I as I said, I don't write historical works. If I wrote historical fiction, I'd have a very different answer for you.
Well, maybe not as different.
I'd have better sales too. But you know, I've on occasion, you know, read work that has become highly recommended either by, you know, the critics and the book reviews or some friend, novels, typically novels, and they're packed with historical veracity, and to me they're just absolutely empty and I can't bear them. But that's just, you know, my taste. Like, I also don't like chocolate ice cream. That doesn't make chocolate ice cream a bad thing, even though coffee ice cream. I don't like coffee ice cream. I do like chocolate ice cream. Doesn't make coffee ice cream necessarily as bad as coffee ice cream.
Dale, I have a question. Jennifer, I remember when you came to Nourish in the days when it was in person, and you were talking about the young adult book you had written about, right? I don't have the name.
Oh yeah, I have another new book. I forgot. I have this. Whoops, sorry. I have this book too that came out a year ago.
Yeah. So wait a minute. So I'm going there. So you know, the book you were talking about the last time was a young man with serious psychological problems.
Right.
And then, when we were talking about your coming to speak, it was the art of dumpster diving.
Right.
And that's an entirely different person.
Totally different.
And unfortunately, I haven't read it. And then we're talking about an old survivor who speaks Yiddish.
Right.
So it's not historical fiction. Is this all somehow generated from your experience, from your life? Are we picking threads of your life and seeing into your
deep, darkest?
Yeah.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think, look, all of us, no matter what our work is, all the work we do comes from us. If it's imaginative work, if it's, if it's being an account, it's still your brain working through those numbers. Of course, it all comes from me and my experiences, and every experience I've ever had, including everything I've ever read, every movie I've ever seen.
I feel like I wish I could do this. I mean, I feel like you walk around with a little diary and you say, I've seen this young man, and you make a note, and then some point you sit down and a story emerges. I mean, somehow you've captured all of those experiences and have been able to repeat them or relive them in your stories. And
well, they're not, but I make them up. I make them up. They're not, the stuff I write in newspapers, I don't make up.
Yeah.
Stewart used to say that I wrote, I don't know, he used to say I made up my journalism and wrote fiction from life, but he was just being contrary, as he likes to be. But no, I mean that's what fiction is. You make it up. So look, I'm writing a long book now, a novel now, and I based a character on somebody I'd known in fourth grade, only because I don't know her, only because her backstory was so astonishingly awful. And something about her backstory resonated with me in this novel I'm working on now, and I just kind of put it in there, and it worked because I could fill in the details, because I can imagine what that house in Georgetown in Washington looked like, because I've been to 2 or 3 dozen fancy houses in Georgetown in my lifetime, growing up in the area, and so forth and so on. So it's just, Picasso, did everything he painted come from his psyche and his eyes and his experience and his imagination, his sense of humor and his sexuality and all his girlfriends and everything else? Of course. Nobody else painted those paintings. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but a lot of us see those images, have those experiences, and stories don't emerge. So there's something magical. It's sort of
because you're not an artist. You're like, thank God my oncologist is not an artist. Like, I don't want my oncologist to be an artist. My oncologist understands cell division. Thank you. Right? It's like we have different gifts.
Jennifer, I have a question for you. I have a friend who writes novels, and she starts off with just the germ of an idea, and she never knows where it's going to go.
Right.
She follows it as if she's just meeting this character and following this character through life to see what are they going to do next? What are they going to think next?
Right.
But she said that a lot of people actually have, a path laid out from the beginning. They know where they're going. Do you get in one of those categories?
I'm more like your friend.
You are? Okay, so you don't know.
Plot is my weak point. And in short stories, it's not an issue because they're short.
Right.
In a short story, basically, you need a turning point or you don't have a story. So in 20 pages, 30 pages max, that's not that many balls up in the air. In a longer work, no, I don't plot, and I probably should, but I'm more like you because I'm following the character's psychological development and how because there are two really basic divisions in fiction. Basic. I'm not talking about genres, across genres. There's character-driven fiction, which is what your friend writes, which is where the psyche of the character coming up against the character's experience determines the actions of the character and the unfolding of the plot. And then there's plot-driven fiction, which is mainly what sells, which is you set up a kind of straw man character in a situation as the situation that is the driver of the action. And I don't have a taste for the latter kind of work. I just don't. I don't mind it in a movie, like a good, spy action, whatever, great. But for my own reading pleasure, I don't go there, and so I don't write there. I don't write there either. So I'm like your friend.
Because she was describing to me how, sometimes a completely stray person will appear in her thoughts.
Right.
And she writes them into the story, and she says, is this person just like a diversion and I should get rid of them, or should I keep following, because are they going to lead me back to the path, And so it's really fascinating to me.
Right.
So
she doesn't know till she knows.
With that, I'm going to say thank you.
Thank
This
you.
is great. I mean, and I want to tell you what we're doing on June 15th.
Okay.
Because we're picking up on this whole question of fiction and life and biography. Rosemary Steinbaum, who's been working on the Philip Roth collection at the Newark Library, is going to talk about biography versus life as it applies to Philip Roth. And
Wow.
so we will talk more about fiction or reality, whatever that might be. So that's June 14th, Rosemary Steinbaum on Philip Roth and biography.
So
Maybe
this
we
is
can
true.
broadcast it from
June 6th. Excuse me, it's June 15th.
That's what I said. What did I say?
You
Sorry.
said the 14th. There's a Board of Trustees meeting the night before.
No, the 14th is Monday. I apologize. It's June 15th.
Yeah.
We'll see more about that. Adrian wants to broadcast it from the library. Why don't you complicate my life a little bit?
or do a field trip. We can all go there.
We'll all go to the library.
So my sister has a friend named Amy. And Amy tells the true story that she was shopping at Lord & Taylor, wherever, Saks Fifth Avenue, for winter coats. And she didn't have a lot of money. She's a journalist. And she looked at this coat and she tried it on. It was beautiful. And she looked at the price tag and it was too much. And she put it back. And an older man bought it for her. And that older man was Philip Roth.
Oh my gosh.
Walked up and bought it for her.
Yeah,
How'd you know?
because he was Philip Roth. She recognized him. Like, I can't accept this, too late. I've already bought it. And he, he said, good day to you, and walked away.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Something?
Was it in Newark? It must have been in Newark.
No.
So
Wherever.
Jennifer,
Manhattan, right?
Yeah,
you
like
have
20
to
years ago.
come and we'll let you introduce Rosemary with that Philip Roth story.
Unbelievable.
Is Rosemary going to talk about the Philip Roth biography or just biography?
Well, so I'm going to let Rosemary tell you about that, but the Philip Roth biography, which was going to be a centerpiece of a whole thing at the library, opening up the Philip Roth wing, that speaker has been canceled.
Yes, he has,
Oh.
along with his book. But
Yes.
his book, did you see that another publisher had picked it up? It's going to come out now.
No kidding.
Yeah, in paperback. It was the exact same book.
Something, or there was salacious. Or was there was something about it?
The Jewish book of book review just had this evening had a webinar on Roth.
Oh,
It was very interesting. And the thing with the coat, it seems that he did things, very nice things, very often, even to people he didn't know or people he sometimes didn't like.
That's funny.
wow.
That's
So
what we all do as mothers, nice things to people we don't like that much.
The Jewish Review of Books, it may be recorded. Yes,
I'd
it
love
is
to
recorded.
see that.
It'll be on their website tomorrow.
Ah, okay.
So Jennifer, thank you. I just
Thank you.
love the fact that you send me an email, which I rarely get, and say, hey, I'll speak. Jennifer uses many of my other email addresses. I love the fact that you step up and say, I will do this. And it's great to have you. And thank you, Dale. You know, you always add the flavor. And so what a great night.
It
Thank
was
you.
fun.
Very nice.
Fun.
Yeah, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
we'll see you June 15th one more time.
Absolutely.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.